Was there any sort of purity culture instilled? Like girls are like flower petals, etc.
Yes. Yes, there was. Yeah, it was definitely taught that... Oh, goodness. I don't even know where to start with this. Yeah, so I would say it's definitely taught purity culture. We were definitely taught, like, our bodies are temples, and, like, modesty, kind of like what we talked about before, like, not showing our shoulders and making sure that our shorts weren't too high. A lot of that was kind of taught through the lens of, like, it was our jobs to make sure that the boys kept their thoughts clean.
Mm-hmm.
And it was definitely taught, too, that, like, yeah, so it was kind of the girl's responsibility and to remain pure and how important that was, basically so that you're not used for your husband. Like, you're not used before your husband. Was definitely...
So that you're not a temptation to the boys.
So you're not a temptation to the boys, and keep yourself clean and pure, because, like, if you want a husband who's a good priesthood holder, he's not going to want a girl who has been used. Or, like...
Oh, my goodness.
I know. It's cringy. I, like, have a hard time even saying that out loud right now. But that was definitely something that was taught.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well...
Purity culture was a thing.
Yeah.
And it was definitely one of those things, too. Like, I remember... I think some of what I look back now and cringe the most over is that we always had this fear of these lines that were never, like, very well defined, too. And so, like, if you made a mistake, then you have to go talk to the bishop. But no one ever wanted to have the uncomfortable conversation of telling you what a mistake actually was. So, you know, like, some people would every once in a while, and it was kind of refreshing because no one knew what the line was. And so I feel like a lot of times, like, I remember going, hopefully this isn't too much information, I remember going, like, the first time I ever went to the bishop was because, like, a boy had put his hand on my stomach. And I went to the bishop to confess. Because...
You felt that was something...
Because I felt like that was something, because the line was so blurred, and not blurred, but, like, the line was so unclear that I was like, okay, well... You know, that's my body. Mm-hmm. And
so I assumed that it was underneath your shirt, though. It wasn't.
Yeah, underneath my shirt.
Okay.
Yeah, like we're kind of, and like not even, didn't go up, nothing else. Like no inappropriate parts are touched. But it was one of those things that it was like, I felt like I had to confess because he had touched my skin. And so that's just like a really small example of just not knowing where boundaries were supposed to be, and where, like, all I knew is that I needed to confess, and that was emphasized that we needed to. And I remember watching a young woman's video once, and it, like, messed with my head because this girl had met this amazing returned missionary, and then she went to go and have, like, her interview to be able to go to the temple, and he asked if there was anything unresolved. I don't know if you've seen this video. And she had to confess something, and then they weren't able to go and get married in the temple right away, and it postponed their wedding, okay? But they never said what the girl did, and we never knew, like I remember leaving and just being like, oh my gosh, so if you don't confess everything to the bishop, if there's anything that you've done wrong, it can keep you from being able to be married to an amazing person and all these things. And I just remember my mind running wild, like, did she just kiss him too long? Like, as a young teenager, I'm like, did he kiss him too long? Did, you know, like, he touch her shoulder? Did he touch her belly? Like, all these type of things. And so, yeah, sorry, this is a long one.
No, it's interesting.
It's just a little glimpse.
These are some things that I haven't heard of, you know.
Yeah, but I feel like that the mindset of just that you're supposed to confess, but no one will tell you, like, what exactly
where the line is.
And I felt like that was probably the hardest as a teenager. And we are also, I always felt like it was very much my job to keep boys in control. No, it was my job, right?
And that was probably taught in young women.
So the way that I dressed, and then I remember like kissing in high school and being like, it was my job to make sure that we didn't kiss too long. It was my job to make sure that, you know, we didn't French kiss. It was my job to make sure that his hands were placed only directly on my back if we were to kiss. You know, all those type of things. I remember specifically thinking every single time I even kissed somebody to make sure that it was my job that everything was being appropriate.
I wish I had some insight on here. I wish I had some insight here on what the young men were taught, but I didn't grow up in the LDS church because where I was from, I mean, it was don't even look at a girl.
Yeah.
You're gonna be
that's purity culture.
Yeah,
there.
exactly. Don't even look at a girl because you're going to be assigned a wife when the time comes, and it's all going to be up to the prophet. And don't even think about it. So that was a different experience, of course. But
yeah,
I wish I had some insight here on what the young men were taught in the LDS church. Though.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, but it was definitely a lot of responsibility on the girls. That's for sure.
Well, there you go. Great question. I hope that was answered.
Hopefully that wasn't too much information.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I think it was great. I mean, people like details.
I mean, I just had to confess something that I confessed to a bishop, so hopefully no one will judge me too harshly.
How dare someone touch your stomach, right? Why aren't LDS supposed to drink coffee?
That is a good question.
I assume a lot of people have this question.
Yes. So I will give you the LDS answer. Mm-hmm. And kind of give a little bit of the history and backstory on it, and then a little bit of how we feel now, because I feel like this one deserves that. So, the Doctrine and Covenants has the Word of Wisdom, which was a revelation given to Joseph Smith, and it says that they are not supposed to drink hot drinks. Mm-hmm. Then after that, because everyone said, well, what is considered a hot drink? Prophets came out and said, hot drinks are coffee and tea. And that is really as far as the explanation went and has remained. No coffee, no tea. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, people continue to have questions. And the answer is always, this is one of the few things that the answer has always been because the prophet said so, because the word of wisdom says so. Mm-hmm. Nobody really has an answer. Some people have continued to try to make sense of it. So you'll hear a lot of times people be like, oh, LDS people can't have caffeine. Well, that's actually not true. Like, nobody's ever said that you can't have caffeine. Mm-hmm. It's just the only thing that comes in common with coffee and tea that isn't in hot chocolate or herbal tea.
That's true, because they're okay drinking those hot drinks.
And I grew up, my mom didn't even let us have herbal tea because she was like, oh, it's tea. And she was a convert. So in her mind, she's like, they said no coffee or tea, so that means herbal tea. And then there's a lot of families, and the church is now I think the church might even have come out and said now that some herbal teas are okay, but there's definitely like it doesn't really honestly have a whole lot of sense to the line of like what teas are allowed and what teas aren't. Right. Besides, it does seem to be related to caffeine, but then if you say, well, you can't have caffeine, they'll say, no, that's not the case at all. So take that as you will.
And every family interprets the word of wisdom a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know there are some families that don't drink anything with caffeine in it because that's their interpretation.
Yeah, because that's their interpretation of the word of wisdom is that if it's no coffee, no tea. Some people are like, so iced coffee. And again, as far as like the strict word of wisdom would go, or like a temple interview question, iced coffee would still be considered a coffee, which you're still not allowed to have, even though it is not a hot drink. So it's very tricky. And I'm not sad about not having to think about that anymore because I no longer believe that coffee and tea
now you just get to choose what you feel or what you learn is healthy and try to make a healthy choice. But yeah, it's because that's difficult. I know some people, like I said, some families don't drink any caffeine and other families drink way too much Diet Coke.
Yeah. I remember girls' camp counselors or like our girls' camp leaders that we weren't allowed to leave the mountain for anything, like to go get food or anything like that. But like they would go down off the mountain just to get more cases of Diet Coke because they couldn't get enough for a whole week. So like, yeah, it's super funny. Or like sometimes people are like, I can't drink coffee, but then they like down multiple energy drinks to like get through college, and I'm like,
that's a healthy choice.
This doesn't make sense, but it's one of those. It's just a rule that needs to be followed because the prophet said so. Because it's in the scriptures.
And that is that. And then you would get to interpret it based on your personal revelation or you know, or prayers, what you feel is right for your family, I guess.
Yeah, but it is a temple. I have to say that with a grain of salt because it is a temple recommend question to be able to enter the temple. You have to get a temple recommend, and in those questions, it asks if you follow the word of wisdom.
Right, but it doesn't get into specifics. Do you drink coffee? Do you drink alcohol? It says, do you follow the word of wisdom? So once again, it's kind of up to your interpretation. So if you feel that you're following it, then the answer is yes.
Yeah.
I assume. That because yes, it's just that's the question.
Big thing, yeah. But that's why.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Great question. On to the next here. I did want to just mention really quick as well that I'm not going to every single question here because there are several questions that are basically the same thing, worded a little bit differently. So if I skip your question, I'm sorry. It's because I got to the person before yours that is almost the same. So, but we're trying to answer and get all the information out there that we can. Next question. What did you think after your first temple endowment?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I got endowed. Well, actually, we should start with what an endowment is. So an endowment is when you go to the temple for the first time, you are able to make covenants with God for yourself, and they call it taking out your endowment. And for girls, you tend to go either like when you're going to go on a mission, or same with guys. Like guys tend to go when they're going to go on a mission, guys or girls, or when you're about to get married. So I went through and took out my endowments the day before we got married.
Yep.
And for anybody who's LDS watching, don't worry, I promise to be super respectful. I don't want you to like change the channel, being like, I shouldn't be saying anything. Promise, I would not do that. But I will say that going through it the first time was a little bit overwhelming because you're not really told a whole lot about what is going to be happening or what is going on in the temple before you go. And so there were definitely things that I was expecting, and there were also a lot of things that I was not expecting or wasn't sure what was going to happen. And so a lot of those, it was just like a lot. It's a lot to take in. There's a lot of learning to do and things to remember. And I remember coming out and being like, I think I got some of that, but it was just overwhelming. However, because I was getting married the very next day in the temple, like I had to go through and have my endowments taken out before I could get sealed in the temple to see them. And so because my wedding was the next day, it was like all this stuff coming in from what had just happened, and I had to kind of like push it aside because I was focused on getting married the very next day and finishing wedding preparations and all those things. And so when we got back from our honeymoon, actually, Sam was really great. I was like, I think I need to go back. And so I would always encourage people that are LDS that like the first time you go through, you definitely want to go through a couple times, like right in a row, as soon as you can, to really get a full understanding. Try to understand the covenants that you're making, and to fully just feel more comfortable with the whole temple experience. And so, I would always encourage LDS people to, if the first time you go through, you want to go through, I'd say at least 3 times before you are fully understanding everything that's going on.
Yeah, and even then you'll probably have more questions in that.
I think you'll always have questions, which is part of, I'd say, like, a pro of the temple, is that people will say, like, you go and you feel like you learn something new every time. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that you'll, like, ever fully grasp all of it. Yeah. But it's, I'd say overwhelming the first time. And having it the day before your wedding is, they need a better format than that because, Yep.
Yeah, I agree. It was the same for me. The first time I went through, it was a little bit. It was a lot of information to take in, and it was. For me, I did have some temple preparation classes that I went to. That I was taught a little bit about. Hey, this is kind of what it's all about. Not any details, but this is kind of what's to be expected. This is what the purpose of it is. And so did you not have any type of class or any type of information beforehand?
Did we go to temple prep to get? No, I don't think.
I think so.
We talked to your
the family. Yeah.
I think we talked to your family. So a little bit, like I knew the basic.
Not my FLDS family.
Yeah.
My new family, the LDS family.
LDS family. I mean, I would say that I knew what the overall purpose of it was, and what some of like the covenants were going to be, or like what the main gist of it was, but definitely not to the full extent of what what's going to happen.
Yeah. No, and it's hard to fully understand what's going to happen without actually going through anyway. But anyway, definitely highly recommended to go several times if you're wanting to fully understand, before you get a good grasp of what the meaning is.
Yes, and all of you who are not LDS right now are like, please tell us what happens. And that would be for another video if we could. I think we could totally do a very respectful, the things that were allowed. There are definitely, the temple, I'll just say real quick, there's way more that you're allowed to talk about than what you're not allowed to talk about. And overall, I think it gets handled with way more secrecy than what is actually necessary.
Right.
And so, and we've even talked to, stake presidents and other people that are in higher positions within the church that say the exact same thing. So it's a place for you to go and learn. It is a place for you to make covenants where you're just making promises with God. And, the way that those happen is the secret part that we would not share. But
just to be respectful.
To
those members.
But but it's overall it's just making covenants and promises and
for both,
learning things
for both the living and those that have passed on, the dead.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a lot of information that would be a whole other video for sure.
I think we could do it respectfully though, so I think we should we'll put that one on the list too.
Another one to add to the list.
Another one to add to the list.
All right, great. On to the next question here. We have, did you socialize with non-LDS?
Yes. Okay, so again, going back to the fact that both of my parents are converts, none of my family was LDS, like my extended family at all. And I know there's a couple other questions that I can kind of link into this one. Like someone had asked if LDS members could, like, why can't they go into other churches? And that would be a family specific thing because you can definitely go in other churches. Like when my aunt got married, we went to Catholic Mass beforehand and then they got married. It was very, very long because Mass is very long.
So they got... Okay, so she got married in the Catholic Church.
So when you get married in the Catholic Church, they go through, like, you have a whole, basically the same as a sacrament meeting for the LDS people. You go through Mass first, and then they have their marriage ceremony. So I'd been to Mass before, been into other churches, cathedrals in Europe, gone to Mass there. So that's definitely a family thing, and I was definitely surrounded by other people who weren't LDS. My family, sometimes you'll hear of, like, kids that are like, oh, they weren't allowed to play with kids who weren't LDS, and that was never my family. I had lots of friends that weren't LDS. I had friends that were LDS in high school. I had a lot of friends that weren't LDS and that I'm still friends with to this day. It was never something that I couldn't hang out with people like that. And I also played tennis all over the country from the time I was 10 to 18. And I was one of the very few LDS kids that played in the juniors tour.
So you had a lot of tennis friends.
A lot of tennis friends. Most of them were not LDS. There was only a handful of us that were. And so if anything, I would say that I always try to take pride in being like, in Mean Girls when they're like, I'm the cool mom. I always take pride in being like, I'm the cool Mormon. At that time, we called ourselves Mormons, by the way. But I'm the cool Mormon. I'm the cool Mormon who's willing to have friends that are not Mormon. And I never felt odd about it. Like even in college, my best friend was not LDS, and I didn't mind if we were somewhere and they were drinking and I wasn't. It didn't make me feel uncomfortable at all. It was like, that's their choice. I choose not to. Not a big deal. And so, it wasn't. If anything, I'd say I was that person who looked at every opportunity I could to be a missionary. And to try to teach people more about the church. And because people would have all sorts of questions, and I feel like I was that person who felt like I had all the answers, honestly, and got really good at the main questions that people had about the LDS church. I could give you the answers just like that. And honestly, some of my questions later on were I would answer somebody's question and I knew exactly how to answer it to have it make sense on the outside, and then internally I'd go home and be like, okay, I know they accepted that answer and that's good enough, but is it really good enough for me in my heart? I had all the right answers, but deep down I knew that they might not have been good enough, but they were good enough for people who weren't members of the church. or they didn't know very much about it.
Yeah, the answers on the surface, but there was more to those topics that could be discussed if the question were to arise.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and this was her growing up in St. George. Obviously, now we live in Las Vegas, and living here, there's a lot of members of the LDS Church, and but they have probably most of their friends are non-members because there's not nearly as many LDS members living around them.
Yeah.
So, and in school and all that. So I can imagine it's even more so here. All right, on to the next. What age do you have to wear garments?
Okay, so a quick little thing on what garments even are. Mm-hmm. When you go through and you do receive your endowment, you receive garments, which are a special symbol of your covenants that you're making with Heavenly Father. And so the same way that a lot of religions have special items of clothing to be able to represent specific things to them, that's similar as to what garments are for the LDS. And so it's not an age thing. It's when you take out your endowments. Mm-hmm. So it just depends on that age. Like we've had friends that, if they get married at 18, then they have garments as soon as they go through the temple. Then we didn't get married until we were 23, so I was 23 before I started wearing them.
Yep.
But it has to go with temple attendance, not
age.
Not age.
But typically speaking, you would have to at least be 18 now for the boys before they serve a mission. Typically speaking now, you'd have to be at least 18.
Yeah, like we didn't, right. If you mean like compared to like where Sam's talked before about they had garments on children. Mm-hmm. Yeah, children don't wear garments because, children aren't allowed in the main area.
Where I grew up, FLDS, at 8 years old, when you're baptized, that's when they had garments in the FLDS as well. Different, but also garments, and we started wearing those at 8 years old.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I knew that. I thought it was even younger than that. Was it not till 8?
It may have changed over time, but that's what I remember.
Okay, cool.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, so a little bit different there, but anyway, for the FLDS, it depended on when you attended the temple. Okay, do you have siblings? Okay, sorry. Let's start this question again. Do you have siblings? Are they still Mormon? If so, will your kids and theirs be treated any different?
Oh,
ooh, good question.
So, I'm the oldest of 4, so I have 2 little brothers, little sister, and both my brothers are still active LDS, and my sister is not. Mm-hmm. She's no longer a member. So, that is our dynamic, and all of our children will be treated exactly the same. And yeah, my parents are really good about treating all of us the same no matter what we believe, and they're the same way with their grandkids. So they're awesome. And they're definitely, there won't be any kind of different treatment.
No, her family is very, very close with our kids. So
yeah, with all the grandkids.
With all of them. So I can't imagine there being any.
Our little 2-year-old actually just today, so he has a little cousin, and I won't say his name, but he was like, he always calls him cousin, I'll say cousin L. So he's like, cousin L. And today my mom had said something about him and was like, I have 3 grandbabies. And my little boy's like, yes, and cousin L is ours. And so they're really, really close and really, really cute together. And there'll never be issues because of religion.
No, not at all. Okay, next question here. Did you honestly believe in Joseph Smith? The levels in heaven. Very curious.
Absolutely. 100%. All growing up, I would say I went to EFY, which I loved. And again, like even all the way through teenage years, all the way into college, I really loved everything about the church. I loved being a member of the church, and I always wanted to show and prove my faithfulness to it. Yeah. And going to EFY, or especially for youth, it's like a summer camp where you go for a week and you take all religion classes and you do dances and all this stuff, but it's all based around growing your testimony. Mm-hmm. And I did that multiple years and loved it. And I'd say that I received most of my super strong testimony in Joseph Smith at that time. At EFY when I was 14 or 15, and I felt very, very strongly all the way until Sam and I were in our faith transition. Yeah. But definitely believed in him.
Yeah, Melissa likes to go do things 100%. So if she believes in something and that's what she, is basing her life around, she does it 100%. And so I would say that's probably why it was so difficult for her. One of the reasons when she started realizing that she didn't believe anymore was the fact that she was in it 100%. And so that's
that
anyway.
is really, really hard.
But that's another topic as well. Okay, when did you realize not everyone was LDS? How did you feel?
Oh, so that was really, really early on. Again, since my parents were converts and none of my cousins were LDS, and in tennis and friends. So I realized pretty early on, just from extended family, that not everyone was LDS, and it didn't make me. If anything, I always felt like we were the quote-unquote lucky ones. All of my extended family, had more complicated family circumstances, and so I think that where I was in like a much more like stable family situation, I always attributed it to that growing up, thinking that was because of the church.
Yeah.
And so I think that in my mind growing up, the church was just this awesome thing that I was so lucky to have when other people didn't. So I always felt super like blessed and lucky.
But you knew from a very early age that
I was a lucky one.
Yeah.
And that there were lots of people who didn't have it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that, I imagine that's not the same for every member of the church, especially those that live in parts of Utah. But I don't know. I feel like the church, especially now, talks a lot about other religions and things, even in church meetings. So
and you're taught a lot to be like a member missionary and to always be missionary. And so in order to be a member missionary, you have to be, actively talking to people who aren't LDS. So I feel like it's pretty common to like reach out to people who aren't LDS.
Yeah, definitely. And that was the same for me, So growing up, even where I came from, I feel like I knew right away that it wasn't just us. Okay, looking back on being a young LDS girl, do you feel like you had to suppress or censor yourself to fit religious expectations?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'd say all the way until I was like 18. I never felt like I was censored because it was so important for me to feel like I was doing the right thing.
Right.
And because the LDS religion has a very specific list of what is right, it was like you had so many rules that if you're a rule follower like I was, it is like a very comforting place to be because I knew exactly what I could and couldn't do for most things, right?
Yeah.
Minus the sexual line, I guess. But like beyond that, like, and even then, I always cautioned on the being like extra. Confessing too much, like extra, right? But as far as everything else, I feel like the rules for me, I loved it because I just always knew what was expected and I could just meet those expectations, and then I felt good about myself and I'd get a pat on the back for doing what I was supposed to and being a good example for other people and being a good missionary and all those type of things that just make you feel really good when you're a kid wanting to get the approval of everybody.
Yeah. Great question though.
Yeah.
At what point in your life did you begin to put church questions on the shelf? Some are very, never mind. That's the whole question.
That's a question. I had my first questions when I was 18 years old in my first year of college. And my best friend, still one of my best friends to this day, her family, she was an LDS. And her family was not LDS. And it was the first time that I think I saw a family that had like parents that had been married for a super long time and that like had a close family relationship, and their family was just full of good people. And the first question I ever had was just a realization of if they weren't sealed in the temple as a family, did that mean that on the other side they would be separated? And that because the LDS church teaches, families are forever, and that if you're sealed, you can be married for eternity. And it was the first time that I had questioned, well, if I can be sealed to my family for eternity through a sealing, what does that mean for all the families who are not? Right. And I mean, the LDS answer is that they'll have a chance to be sealed in the next life on the other side. And so they're kind of covered that way. But for me still, I was like, wait, so if they don't accept it on the other side, and we're still the same people on the other side, like if they don't accept it, like is God going to separate them? That was my first question, I'd say. And I think her family was just such a good example to me. And because all of my extended family, again, was like lots of broken families, single motherhood, things like that, I always growing up felt like my solid family unit was because of the church. Mm-hmm. And without the church, there were all these other things. And then, you know, obviously as I got older and especially going into college, I was realizing, no, there's lots of broken families within the church and there are solid families outside the church. And but when I had that question, I went to one of my returned missionary friends and had a good long talk about it. And he helped tell me the importance of the temples and why it was important and how my friend's family would have the chance on the other side, and gave me the typical explanations that helped me feel
that was good enough.
That was good enough at that time. But I'd say that was the first time that I had something like kind of lingering that was always in the back of my mind.
Okay, and on to the next question. Someone says, "Hi, Melissa. Were you were you aware of the media's stereotypical and mocking view of LDS, and how did that make you feel?"
Yes, I was definitely aware of it. Especially, I'd say, like in the tennis world and stuff, because I was one of the very few. Like, I was definitely in a minority. But honestly, I was one of those people that, like, one, there's things about every different group, whether it's religion, whether it's just like a community group, like you have to be able to laugh at some things, right? Mm-hmm. Like the fact that we have funeral potatoes that like a potato casserole that are only ever brought to funerals that are absolutely delicious, okay? Like there's things that people laugh at, or green Jell-O with carrots in them. Yep. If you've never heard of that.
They're actually called funeral potatoes, right?
Yeah, they're actually called funeral potatoes. Anyways, so there's like some cultural things that are funny within the church that like you just need to laugh at them because people aren't being malicious or mean when they're talking about him. Mm-hmm. Even the things where people were trying to be harsher, I always tried to take those and turn them into missionary moments. And so I kind of, I don't know, I was always open for people joking around because if they wanted to joke or poke fun at me for my beliefs, I could always turn around and be able to try to teach them something. And so I know someone else had asked if I'd ever seen the South Park episode on the Mormons before. And kind of a funny story with that, because again, looking for opportunities for missionary moments. But I had a friend that we actually made a deal. And I said, you know, he's like, have you ever seen the South Park episode? And I was like, no, I didn't watch South Park. That is highly inappropriate. But I was like, I'll make you a deal. I will watch the South Park episode with you if you go to Temple Square in Salt Lake City with me. And he was down to do it. Yeah. So we went to Temple Square and like, I thought that it was awesome. It was giving me this awesome missionary opportunity. Looking back now, like, I distinctly remember him seeing Adam and Eve and being like, I believe in evolution. This isn't even a thing. And I would just, like, brushed it off. Like, what do you mean, Adam and Eve? Like, what? I didn't even know that people, like, didn't believe in Adam and Eve. Right. So that was kind of funny. But then we watched the South Park episode. And looking back now, it's even funnier because when I was watching it, so many times I would pause and I'm like, that's not true. That's not how it really happened. That's not true. That's not how it really happened. And then now, since learning more about church history, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it actually, some of those things are true. Yeah. And I totally told this guy that they were not true and that like they were just trying to make fun of us. And, you know, I didn't know at that time that there was a stone that Joseph Smith used to translate the Book of Mormon and that he would put it into a hat, which now the church has come out and like, they have the steer stone, so it's a real thing that really did happen, in case any of you are wondering. You can see it on the church's website. Yep. But I didn't know that at that time, so I was like telling him that wasn't true and that they were mocking him. And
little did you know.
Little did I know, right? But I thought I knew everything, guys.
South Park had it all figured out, apparently.
South Park's written by a couple.
I believe they're
ex-LDS guys.
Yes, that they had left the people that have left the church. Yeah, so
yeah.
I mean, obviously they're making fun of the church in that episode, but
definitely.
But a lot of the facts that that they're in a way talking about are true.
Well, and at the end of it too, because for those of you who haven't seen it, or if you're LDS and you would never want to see it, which is totally fine, I completely understand. Again, I was doing it for missionary purposes, okay? That whole ending is all about the fact that, like, you know, the beliefs might be different and odd or strange to people, but at the end, you know, Mormons have good hearts and they're good people trying to do their best and be with their families and focusing on like these positive things, which I thought was really sweet at the end. Yeah. And so I did talk to him about that too, you know, and he kind of even said, he's like, yeah, I kind of like the ending. He goes, because like, I may not believe the same as you and I may think that some of your beliefs are really weird. He's like, but at the end of the day, like, you're a nice, kind person. You'll still be my friend and we're able to still like have a good friendship. And so, yeah, it was like a good experience, but it was definitely
kind of the overall
funny
message
for
of
sure.
the episode.
Yeah.
I think. So, anyway, awesome. Okay, on to the next here. Were you able to and encouraged to think about and pursue your education and desired career?
Good question. Okay, so yes, I definitely was always taught that education was important. And it was something that, along with that question, I would say in the back of my mind, I always knew that I would end up wanting to be a stay-at-home mom. That was always really important to me. But my mom was a stay-at-home mom, but not because of the church. It was because she chose to. So she had an education, and it was a decision that her and my dad made because, again, she was a convert after she was an adult. So she hadn't been taught her whole life that her job was to be a stay-at-home mom at all. And she was raised by a single mom who worked. So that wasn't like inherently ingrained in her the same way that it was kind of taught to me. But she was my main example. And so like she always encouraged me to get an education. And even though I think there's a piece of me that wanted to be a stay-at-home mom because I was taught that from the church and the importance of it, I think it mostly actually came from her and her love and desire of wanting to be one was more of an example. But she always told me still, like, you know, I never wanted to wait around for a man just so that I could have kids. That was not it. She was like, go get your education. She always like encouraged me for my own career. And I felt like I was definitely encouraged. And I feel like within the church too, education was always super important.
Right.
It was definitely more, being a mom would be considered more important than an education, I'd say, when I was in high school. But it was definitely like a lot of girls went to college to go and try to find their eternal companions, maybe a little bit too much. I was not one of those. I lived in Happy Valley by BYU and UVU for 3 years and did not get engaged. So I feel like I passed that test.
Lucky me. Thank goodness she didn't get engaged up there.
Yeah, so it was one of those things that I think because of my home life and because of my parents were always super encouraging for my career and for education, that is why I did. Church-wise, I don't know if the church had as big of an influence on me as far as that goes.
I know the church does talk a lot about the importance of education, though.
They do.
So I personally remember that when I first joined the church, I was kind of surprised about how much they encouraged and talked about the importance of getting a good education.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Let's see here. What were the rules on dating? How old? And were there chaperones and such?
So, dating, the rule of thumb is no dating until you're 16. And there were not chaperones, but a lot of kids, it was very common that when you turned 16, you were only allowed to group date, you know, go on double dates or with a lot of people. And that was really, really common around me in the church, for kids to only be allowed to group date until they were 18. My family, again, with my parents being converts, my dad always thought the concept of group dating was really weird. He's like, that's like hanging out. And I'm like, I think that's their point. Like, I think that's what they're trying to get. Want. Yeah, they're like, if they're hanging out in big group settings, less likely for them to get in trouble or kiss too long or, you know, anything like that. But my dad was like, how are you supposed to get to know someone if they're hanging out with, like, their bros or it's in a group setting? They're going to act completely differently. Then you're never going to be able to see how they want to treat you as a lady. And so I never had that rule growing up. I was allowed to single date at 16, but it was very common. But I still had to wait till I was 16. to date.
And that's, I would say, pretty common throughout the church, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. I think that's in the first strength of... Maybe it's not in the handbook. I don't know if it's exactly
But I believe you're right. I believe it does say somewhere that 16 is the age, actually written.
Yeah, it's very, like, if you ask anybody who's LDS what the age of dating is, 99% of them are going to say 16. So, I don't know if it's written down, but it is definitely the law.
Well, there you go. I know that dating in general in the LDS church is very encouraged.
Yeah.
To get out there and meet some people and have a good time. So, all right. Next, kind of interesting question here: dress code in LDS versus FLDS.
Yeah. So I mean, we talked about that a little bit with the modesty, but shoulders had to be covered. Nothing too low or revealing. No short shorts. Normally, you'd have shorts down to the knees. You know, like. The rebel girls would sometimes wear them like halfway up their thigh.
Ooh.
You know, so that was a little, adding a little bit of temptation to those young men. And one set of piercing in each ear. I feel like that's also kind of gone away a little bit. I still only have one because I was just never super into piercings. So I know some people have been like, do you even have your ears pierced? Because I don't wear a lot of earrings. But that was just because I played tennis and they bothered me when I played tennis. So I never was in the habit of wearing earrings a lot, but just one pair of earrings is considered the modesty rules for the LDS.
And I wouldn't say that, out and about grocery shopping or whatever you're doing, would you say that an LDS member would stand out in a crowd based on the way that they're dressed?
I think so.
You do? Okay.
But I think it's because, and Sam and I have this difference a lot. I think being raised LDS, LDS girls can spot other LDS girls based on the way they're dressed a lot easier than what a guy's going to even notice or care. Because with them, it's just like, unless a girl's dressed like super, super revealing, I feel like guys, it's just like, okay, there's girls, and sometimes they wear t-shirts, and sometimes they wear tank tops, and sometimes they wear short shorts, and sometimes they wear pants, and sometimes I feel like for guys it's just not as big of a deal. As a girl, because you knew how strict the dress codes were, it was pretty obvious. And then if girls, sadly, like, I still feel bad about this. I don't know if I would say I treated people differently of it, but it was definitely very common to judge people based on the way that they were dressed. So if someone was LDS and you saw them in a tank top at school, it was like, why aren't they following the rules? Like, they should know better. And so it definitely, I think, being raised in it, you tended to be more judgmental towards it, and so it would stand out more. And so I still, like, we'll be out to dinner or something, and I'll be like, oh, I'm pretty sure they're LDS. Yeah. And he's like, how do you know that? And I'm like, oh, I can tell because, she's wearing an extra shirt under her sweater to, make sure that her, like, modesty is all taken care of and that her garments are covered, or things like that. Like, things I feel like you just notice as a girl more.
Yeah. No, I just don't notice. I mean,
the holes in her jeans aren't above the knee. They only wear holes in the jeans, like, on the knee or below, or they'll wear leggings underneath their holy jeans so that they're not showing... like revealing flesh, like things like that.
Once again, I think it's kind of a family thing too. Like, each family might be a little bit less strict or more strict about these kind of dress codes and all that. But yeah, it's interesting though. I'll be out there with Melissa. We'll be on a date or something, and she'll say, "Oh, they were definitely members of the church," and I'm like, "Really? How did you?" And she'll have this, "Oh, because of this, that, and the other." And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm pretty sure they're wearing clothes. That's what I got out of it. But anyway, it's interesting how you notice so much.
Yeah, I can definitely tell.
And then the continuation of this same question was versus FLDS. The FLDS was completely different, not even close. I mean, the FLDS or the LDS members will kind of blend in with the crowd a little bit more. The FLDS are just completely covered. I mean, from the wrist to the ankle to the neck, everything. Long prayer dresses for the women, and then just button-up shirts with collars and jeans or slacks for the men.
Yeah, but my whole, like, modest is hottest t-shirts and long shorts are like super revealing too, compared to where your Sam was from. So yes, me being modest was still.
It was still. Oh yeah. No, any skin on the arm or anything like that was just a huge no-no in the FLDS. In the FLDS, no makeup of any kind, No.
We definitely wore makeup.
No piercings anywhere of any number. No piercings, period. And then I remember one time my mother put on some just like some lotion. It was some lotion that kind of gave her face a little bit of a glow, and I remember that upset Father a lot because he thought it looked too much like makeup.
Aww.
So I mean, it was very much.
Every girl needs a little glow now and then. Poor mother.
It was very much just natural as far as the face and the skin and all that, and then just completely covered up with a dress or pants and shirts for guys. So
no glow.
No glow.
It was just because then he was like, I don't want to have to go through my normal rotation. I want to go a second night. That's what it was.
I won't get into my opinions on any of that. All right. Really, this is from the same person here. Another question. Are politics discussed in church settings?
I have to think about this one a little bit. I mean, yes.
Not a lot, though.
Not a lot. Okay. It's like, how do I even... Yes and no. So, do they ever, like, bluntly come out and say, vote for this person? So, they always come out over the pulpit and say, please make sure that you vote in your local, like, elections and things like that. I would say the only time growing up where they were like, vote on this was when Proposition 8 was coming out.
I remember that. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
And the church put a lot of money and a lot of time in trying to make sure that marriage stayed between a man and woman, and that anybody was not allowed to marry anyone of the same sex.
Yep.
So that was, like, I'd say probably the biggest time that they were super involved with politics that I saw, like, in my childhood. As far as, like, just at normal church, we're in Utah, and so I feel like everyone was pretty conservative, and then a lot of, like, conservative type values just in general got talked about. So it wasn't like, oh, you need to be Republican or conservative, but it was enough of a deal that I remember specifically, like, who the Democrats in our ward were, and it was, like, a little scandalous that they could be not conservative and be members of the church. So I remember that, which again, so you obviously knew enough about everybody's politics for there to be, like, differences and for it to stand out.
Right. Okay, great. So we have a couple more questions here. So second to last question. I also grew up LDS, someone says. I'd love to know her thoughts, Melissa's thoughts, on the Young Women's Program, and if she thought it played a role in her development into an adult.
I loved Young Women's. So I thought that it was awesome. I mean, obviously there are certain things that were taught in it now that some of the things that we talked about, like the purity culture and, yeah, things like that. But as far as the community that you have in Young Women's and the activities and the girls' camps and all those type of things, I loved it. I think it definitely played a huge role in my life. I mean, in Young Women's, you go to Young Women's every Sunday as part of your church meetings. You go to firesides on Sunday nights frequently, and then you go to Young Women's, for an hour or two every single week as well, like on a weeknight on Tuesday nights. So definitely played a big role. I had some awesome leaders that I still, like, love to this day, that when I see, like, I just run up and give huge hugs to. So I feel like Young Women's overall was, like, a really good experience for me, and some of the like the Young Women Recognition Awards, things like that were important for me, and I felt like really, I don't know, just taught me a lot. There's a lot of stuff, and I know it may sound funny that I'm talking so positively about all these, but I really did have a great experience within the church. And I know I said it earlier, but I'll say it again just to reiterate that my decision in leaving the church had nothing to do with these programs or me feeling like I didn't have good experiences within them. And even now, where some of the things, that I don't want my daughter to be taught that may have been taught within them, I still feel like they helped me become the person that I am, and I'm happy with that. And so I don't have any like regrets about it, or, oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't, had young women's. And yes, maybe I confessed to the bishop over silly things that didn't need to be done. But overall, I feel like they helped me be able to be a good person and to have good morals and standards, even if they were to an extreme that I don't find necessary now for my own daughter. Mm-hmm. But they were good experiences for me.
Yeah.
So.
And we feel pretty equipped now to be able to teach our children and give them the, knowledge they need to live a good life and to make their own decisions and choices.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's things that I learned from young women's that I would want to carry on, along with the things that I wouldn't, and there's definitely things and different ways to go about what they taught as well. Like, I think that it's super important to teach to be respectful of your bodies. Mm-hmm. Now, is showing your shoulders disrespectful? That's going to depend on the person. And now I'm confident in saying no. Mm-hmm. Like, I am not going to tell my daughter that it's her job to control the thoughts of the boys around her by not showing shoulders or not showing, a couple inches above her knee, are those type of things. Mm. But I feel like now being able to teach how I wouldn't be able to teach the way that I feel equipped to now if it wasn't for my upbringing. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Okay, great. So you got a lot of good out of it then.
Yeah.
Good to hear. Okay, last question. This question has several different parts to it, so do you want me to break it down in pieces, or do you want the whole question?
Oh, you know what? Go ahead and do the whole question.
Okay.
Bring it on.
All right, let's see if you can remember all these pieces.
It's going to be the final one.
All right. So let's see here to the question. I wondered how Melissa's father felt about Sam. In general, is there a lot of support among the LDS Church for helping FLDS people who wish to leave? Were Melissa's parents worried Sam might want to go back after you were married?
Good questions. It's kind of funny because I heard a lot more that my mom got asked this question more than I ever did about whether or not she was worried that Sam would want to go back to his old religion or that he would want multiple wives. And she met Sam very early on. Both my parents did. I think we'd only been on 2 dates when they met him. And so they knew him well from the beginning of our relationship. And as a matter of fact, my dad was the one who actually kind of made us officially boyfriend girlfriend, because we were with my parents out on a family outing and he went to introduce Sam. And we were holding hands, but we hadn't called it official. We'd only been dating 2 or 3 weeks. And my dad goes, "Oh, this is my daughter Melissa, and this is
Sam,
this is her boyfriend." Yeah. And he just was like, let's not dance around this. This is her boyfriend. And we both were just okay, yeah, pretty much.
So from then on, we would tell people official. That we were, yeah.
So my dad made us official, which is kind of funny, but.
So I feel that he approved of me.
Yeah, he definitely approved, and.
I don't know if he still does. No.
He says that. He goes out, doing bro stuff with my dad all the time. And
we get along very well.
Yeah, so it's, they felt really good about it, and. Yeah, I think that overall, LDS people are like really open to helping the FLDS leave. Again, it's so similar in the history and in the basics that the LDS feel like the FLDS are just like, they're just that far off, and then it kept going. But like as far as like core doctrine goes, they're so similar that it's like, oh, you're so close anyway, so just come on in. The water's great.
Exactly. And a testament to that is my new family.
Yeah.
When I moved out, I went straight from there into my new family's home, and they accepted me and brought me in as their own. And
we're still part of their family.
Yeah. Well, they are my family. And so they just introduced me to the church, and so obviously very, very willing to help the FLDS and try to help me get on my feet and teach me the teachings of the LDS Church.
And there were kids in my home ward that lived right down the street that they had taken in a boy who'd been kicked out of the FLDS as well. So it was common around me to see kids, especially if they were kicked out young, like they were taken in by LDS families and became part of that family, and that was something very common. So meeting Sam, it wasn't I wasn't uncommon with his church's history at all. And I had always lived nearby the FLDS community my entire life because we were only 45 minutes outside of Hilldale, Colorado City, St. George's. And so, like, him being from out there was not really ever a concern. It wasn't a concern for me. I did get asked in a temple interview question, like, before we got married. A stake president did ask me if I had any concerns. And I was like, no, like, I hadn't even thought of that. So, other people, like, had asked my mom and had asked me, but it was, all you had to do was meet Sam to know that it wasn't a worry or concern at all.
Yeah. And at this point, when we were, looking into getting married and dating and all of that, I had served a mission, so I had changed a lot since originally moving away from the FLDS church, and I was fully immersed into the LDS church at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And so at that point, we were both on the same page, good to go as far as, like, religious beliefs and everything went. And so it was never really an issue that he was from out there at all.
I never felt like I was judged by her family or looked at any differently than anyone else because of my background. They seemed that my personal feelings is that they accepted me right away and that there weren't any concerns. But
no, there really weren't. Like I said, I think part of that is just you became part of the family, like, so quickly too.
Yeah.
Like, he wasn't scared, which, again, just having a guy who wasn't scared to, like, meet my family so early on was, like, super attractive. You were super attractive, babe. I was like, oh my gosh, like, he wasn't running away scared. He was like, oh yeah, I'll meet your mom. Oh, your dad. Yeah, okay, let's go do these family things. And so
I'm a family guy. I love families. So.
Yeah, so it was good, easy transition, and my parents love him, and they still love him. So.
Well, that is the end of our questions. So once again, I know it's a lot, but thank you all so much for the many, many questions.
Thank you.
We really do appreciate these, and we will continue to receive more questions and try to get to all of your questions as quickly as we can. But this has been a lot of fun. So it's been,
Thanks for letting me be able to answer some questions, and I'm sure everyone has some more. So please leave them in the comments. Any any other future videos you want that have to do with me or being raised in the LDS Church, we're more than happy to do. So, like and subscribe. Follow us on Instagram at Growing Up in Polygamy. And, we'll talk to y'all soon.
We'll talk to you soon.